Welcome, welcome, welcome to our first English-speaking union happy hour of 2022. I'm John Singer Sargent, the move to London with Jan Clanton. I'm, as always, Joshua Keppel-Gonzalez, Director of Branch Services at the English-Speaking Union of the United States. And today's happy hour is sponsored by the Central Florida branch. As ideas for these lectures come from you, our members and viewers, please share any ideas or topics for an upcoming speaker or talk using the survey that will appear at the end of our program tonight. Before we get into that program, I wanted to make a couple of quick technical announcements. There will be a question and answer session at the end of this presentation. To submit your questions, please use the dedicated Q&A and chat modules that are at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit questions during any point of the presentation. It doesn't have to be during the dedicated session, but they will be answered in the order received during that dedicated Q&A section at the end of the presentation. I also want to take a moment to recognize the branches with the most registered members out of the roughly 350 branch registrants that we had for today's happy hour. They are the Central Florida, Greenwich, and Charlottesville branches of the ESU. Now, to really start us off today, I'd like to welcome Central Florida Branch President, Barbara Hughes. Barbara?
Good afternoon. I am Barbara Hughes, President of the Central Florida branch of ESU, and it is indeed my pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce Jan Clanton, our guest speaker and a friend. Jan has a BA in art history from Rollins College, and after a 29-year career, Jan retired in 2014 as the Associate Curator of the Orlando Museum of Art, where over the years she held numerous positions, such as Adult Program Specialist, Special Project Coordinator, Assistant Curator of Education, and Coordinator of Educational Programs. Also, while employed by the museum, she was the project coordinator of Arts the Spark, a joint project between the Orlando Museum of Art and the Winter Park Health Foundation. This program was for lifelong learning for seniors living in congregate living sites. This program expanded also for the homeless. And in 2009, the program became expanded to Arts the Spark at OMA as an on-site program and has been tailored for people diagnosed with memory impairment and their healthy caregivers. It was based on a nationally recognized program, Meet Me at MOMA in New York City. Along with these programs for special audiences, Jan oversaw the Orlando Museum's travel, advised Friends of American Art, a collector's circle at the museum, and other on-site adult programs. In 2014, Jan received the Outstanding Achievement Award for Arts and Cultures from the Women's Executive Council, in addition to many other awards that she has received over the years. And since retiring, Jan has continued to offer art appreciation classes in 3 Central Florida counties and is leading the Arts the Spark at OMA on a monthly basis. Jan is a sought-after presenter, and I am certain you will see why as she shares her presentation with you today on John Singer Sargent, the move to London. It is indeed my honor to introduce Jan Clanton to you. Jan?
Well, thank you very much, Barbie. And it is a treasure to be with you here today. I know lots of you are suffering from severe weather. I'm down here in Florida and it's glorious. And we have the perfect tonic to get you out of feeling cloistered inside. So I will pull up my screen and see if we can get closer to our presentation. And with that, here we go. Well, this may look like a 19th century banker, but ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to John Singer Sargent. who was born in 1856 and lived until 1925. He grew up at home everywhere and belonged nowhere. He was the most peripatetic of artists. His parents had moved to Europe in 1854 to become part of the cosmopolitan Americans there in Europe. And 2 years later, after their arrival, he was born in Florence, which seems only, let's see, I don't seem to be able to get mine there. Uh, he took the, he was born in Florence, and how appropriate, since that was the birthplace of the cradle of the Renaissance. But ladies and gentlemen, he was to take the very best that Europe had to offer. And he traveled to Paris to experience the avant-garde and get to know Claude Monet personally. He crossed over the Pyrenees to see the masterworks there by artists like Diego Velázquez. But it would be in England that he would meet his greatest successes. But with all his financial success, he was criticized throughout his lifetime of being not avant-garde enough, nor not traditional. But he was constantly a compromise, accused of that. But for our discussion and for our purposes, what a delightful compromise he was. He was primarily known as a portrait painter, and we will talk more about this dazzling woman. But the root of the criticism was that he only painted the imperial elite of the continent and then eventually America. But don't be taken in by all his silks and satins and his brocades and lush interiors. I think what you will find as we look at his paintings, that he was, they dramatize the changing transition of the upper class at the turn of the century. With that said, as a little bit of an introduction, let's get right down to his professional career and see how he did eventually end up in London. He went to study in Paris in 1874, and he was immediately struck by the avant-gardists working there. That was the same year that Claude Monet put this painting on display, Impression Sunrise. It absolutely floored all the critics that saw it. And of course, this was the painting that became the moniker for their whole group, the Impressionists. So should he study with the avant-gardists who were making a splash, or should he go and study with more of the traditionalists like Cabanel, who painted the Birth of Venus here, that won all the awards at the Paris Salon? Well, I mentioned that he was a compromiser, and I have to say he made a very astute compromise in choosing as his instructor Carolus Duran. It is his portrait, Sargent's portrait of his instructor, Carolus Duran, that you see here, painted when he was a mere 23 years old. And look at this as a suggestion here of the greatness that is to follow. First of all, you have almost a very close palette of colors, with exceptions like black and white that bring your attention to the face, but also to those hands. You have a neutral background, a taupish coat, all of which that drive our attention to the face. And Carolus Duran was an artist who used the techniques of the masters to guide his students and encouraged them to try the alla prima method of painting. Now, this sounds very interesting, but when you find out, it teaches the artist to have confidence enough to do no preliminary drawings on the canvas, but to start immediately with paint. And it was in works by Velázquez that he had seen how Velázquez used it. Here is Velázquez in his own painting entitled Las Meninas. It's one of the recognized masters of art history. And what I mean about what he took about this alla prima method is easier to see in his quote in these details. Here is the princess, and in the original, in the painting, her hair looks like it's been combed beautifully. But here in this close-up, you see it is almost like gossamer, with this light touch of not trying to have every single hair strand delineated, rather the lightness of it all. And ladies and gentlemen, look at the details on the sleeves. Now, Diego Velázquez was painting in the 1600s, and yet look at the soft touch. Let me go back here to this so you can see how it blends beautifully into the complete composition. But here is how our Sargent is taking a tip from the masters. And in 3 paintings that he painted under the tutelage of Carolus Duran, he shows how he is stretching his wings. He's trying different techniques to see what garners the best critiques and which he feels most comfortable with. And this beauty is entitled Luxembourg Gardens from 1879. And I hope you can see on your home televisions how this is a celebration, a masterpiece of nuance, of tonal qualities that are all based on a light touch of lavender, where you see it in the sky and the ground. But look at the pond in the background. It looks like it's liquid mercury. And look at the detail in the gown, the swish as she holds her skirt, and the chiffon to hold on to her hat. None other than James McNeill Whistler was looking at this and painted a portrait of Lady Mew a few years later. Look at the satin on that gown. Here you start to see how artists are taking tips from a variety of their contemporaries. And I love looking in the background with dots of black that take your eye right across the background and jots of color of the red flowers. Here you have a young artist who is using colors in such subtle nuances that really makes us see Sargent trying art as a complete composition to keep the eye fascinated with every detail. This is subtle, understated, art for art's sake, a complete success. But the next painting couldn't be more of the antithesis. Look at Al Olio that he painted in 1882. Here we have a dark taverna, and we have a flamenco dancer almost in her rapture of the climax here. It is a study in blacks and whites. It is an attempt at drama and great theatricality. Here, Sargent, just a couple years later, has left that nuanced lavender and gone into a picture of absolutely the most rejected people in society. The gypsies that you see in the background, even the woman on the right side who looks like she's ready to jump into the dance herself. It exposed aspects of society that people didn't have in paintings in their drawing rooms. This was an attempt to be avant garde himself, maybe playing off the fact that the opera of Carmen by Bizet had become so popular but raised many eyebrows. There is a sense that you could walk right in and enjoy the dance yourself. I find it very interesting that the only person with enough gumption to buy this painting was none other than Isabella Stuart Gardner, who put it right in her house in the Back Bay of Boston. Well, this was his attempt at drama, and eventually he decided to try portraiture. And in the same year, 1882, he was asked to paint the portraits of the daughters of Edward Darley Watt. And here we have a painting of a family, but it is again a very interesting twist on portraiture. Now, ladies and gentlemen, by 1888, photography had been invented, and it kind of released the portrait painter from replicating reality. Rather, now the portrait artist could try to replicate the spirit of the sitter. But look how Sargent has even released that. He has given us four little girls in different states, and in one particular aspect, we don't even see her face. Ladies and gentlemen, he has positioned these girls in a very lovely apartment there in Paris with these wonderful Chinese urns and the Persian carpet to imply their position in society, which is very subtle but well received. But look how he has, instead of giving us really individual portraits of the daughters, he's given us a portrait of the childhood world. Here we have the youngest, who is the center, really the center of the family. She's there with her baby doll. And on the far left, in an asymmetric composition, we have a young daughter who probably goes to elementary school, and I have no doubt is teacher's pet. And then look at the two pre-adolescents, when secrets, shyness, all the fears of growing up seem to trickle down. We capture it all in this wonderful, wonderful portrait. It is a portrait that is perfectly square, 87 inches by 87 inches, another legacy that he took from Las Meninas here that we looked at before. And I think it is so interesting to know that he still is taking the advice of his instructor to look to the masters. There is certainly a decision here that seems to have been made by Sargent, because the next painting we come to becomes really the focal point for our discussion here. And it did lead to John Singer Sargent's move to London. This, of course, is the portrait of Madame X. It was painted in 1883 to 1884, and it was such an outrageous painting that some say Sargent decided he could never gain a better reputation in Paris. He needed to start over. And maybe for us to understand why, we need to see how other artists were painting portraits at the same time. Now, Dante Gabriel Rossetti was part of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and his portrait here, entitled La Garandata from 1874, gives you a good idea of how women were treated a few years before Madame X was painted. Here we see women who are on the verge of becoming in full-blown womanhood, and they are interested in the arts and music, flowers. There is a sense of ennui almost in those eyes, but this is a look at the introspection and beauty that sort of come with sexual awakening. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there is very little sexual awakening coming here. It is woman in full bloom. Look at the rouged ear, which of course was titillating. She has hennaed her hair. And if you are looking at the original, you might detect that the white body powder is really not white, but lavender, that she has dusted herself to look like she has that exquisite skin that every aristocratic lady was hoping for. But ladies and gentlemen, I mentioned how the portrait artists now, because the camera had been invented and the photographer could replicate reality, that the portrait artist could go to the spirit of the sitter or the character. And I emphasize that because what we really see here is that Virginie Gautreau, Madame X's real name, was an interloper. I use that term because she had married into the aristocratic family. She was what snobs in the 19th century might have called a professional beauty, where her physical attributes had attracted the attention of an older husband. What we in the 21st century might have called a social climber. In other words, Sargent in this painting had really exposed her soul, and it was very much something that her family did not approve of. Now, I have to mention this painting from 1884 was always seen as part of the smoking gun, so to speak, of Sargent's scholarship. And yet in 2015, a letter that Gautreau wrote to a friend, and I quote, said, "Mr. Sargent has made a masterpiece of my portrait." So clearly, she was aware of the risk she was taking here. And so maybe it wasn't, it didn't come as a surprise that she was acknowledged a little bit here as an interloper in society. But it took until 1916 for Sargent to sell this painting until to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. It was often said that Sargent did move to London, but he tested the waters first and sent this painting to the National Academy to have it put on display in London to see what kind of response it would get there. This is none other than Madame X's gynecologist, Dr. Pazzi, a little bit outrageous in his gown that almost makes him look like a clerical leader, a little bit like Velázquez, other painting of Pope Leo X. But I come back to this. Actually, this gentleman was very much a forward thinker. He felt very strongly about women's health and women's respect, and he was way ahead of the game. And even though people in London thought it was highly dramatic and too French for them, so to speak, it drove Sargent to reconsider this as his entree. Instead, he painted Carnation Lily Lily Rose, which was named for a tune. It took several years to be painted, but it was sent to England and was immediately accepted as being much more to the Brits' taste. It's a charming scene that he painted he painted it in Broadmoor, and did I say Broadmoor? Broadway in Worcestershire, and it was extremely popular. So it encouraged Sargent to make the change, and with it, he decided that he would do not what British portraitists had done, like Gainsborough. Here, one of his favorite portraits. This is Robert Andrews and his wife from 1748. No, Sargent was not going to paint like Gainsborough, although I do love this painting. Look at how prim Mrs. Andrews is, and look at what a character her husband is. He has his tricorn hat pushed back, just like some of our college students with their baseball caps. He's slouching with his gun through his arm, and look at the way his feet are displayed. And his probably greatest friend right there, his dog. I think this is a riot, but nevertheless, this was not what John Singer Sargent was going to do. He did go there, he did start to paint, and ladies and gentlemen, London, England became the land of his greatest success. He became a legend with his painting there. And we are going to go through these paintings and talk about the personages. But here we start off with Grace, the Martianess Curzon, who typifies what John Singer Sargent was going to absolutely incorporate into his paintings. It was the English psyche, ladies and gentlemen. Distinctions of rank were the most jealously guarded there than any place else in Europe. And even though he wanted to imbue them with being at the top of their form, he dressed them and aggrandized their homes in a way that was subtle, but complemented them to be exactly what they felt they were in their own minds. I think in looking at the Martianess, we understand that she is at the top of her social powers, a beautiful woman, clothed with chiffon that covers her delicate white, not lavender skin. And we see there someone who clearly is a member of the patrician group known as the Souls. And here is another member of that. We're looking at Lady Helen Vincent. She was the Countess d'Abernon. And if you think back to Lady X and think of Lady Helen instead, you can see that there is still a very low neckline, but her piercing look at us leaves nothing to the imagination. She is a woman in total control. You'll notice that everybody has this extremely long strand of pearls, another distinction of rank. And she is there with taffeta, silk, pearls, and this fabulous drape in the background that makes her lips pop off the screen. And look at the subtle touches of the crown mold, or not crown molding, but molding and a column there in the background. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that she is lounging in her palace there. Now, this is a portrait that was commissioned by the Duchess of Devonshire. The Duchess was one of the king's favorite mistresses. And these are the Atchison sisters. Now, this portrait does seem to harken back to Gainsborough. I don't think any of the Atchison sisters had to garden in their backyard and collect the oranges to put on the breakfast table. But it was a ploy that was used in some of the century-old portraits. And here are three daughters that this is ladies Alexandria, Mary, and Theo. It appeals to me from the standpoint of a grandmother having her granddaughters painted like this, all beauties, and something that I'm sure every grandmother would love to bequeath to their grandchildren. Now, he not only painted the titled people in London, he also was in tune to the burgeoning middle class. Now, I want to mention one thing. I mentioned early on in this presentation that John Singer Sargent's parents moved to the continent 2 years before he was born. They thought life was going to be ever so charming there, and their funds had run short. And so portrait painting was extremely important to John Singer Sargent because he could not count on any family money to come his way. And so he could paint the aristocracy, but also the Mrs. Vickers that you see here, whose father was quite a wealthy engineer and wanted his daughters painted because their money was just as good as an aristocrat. And it was the reason that John Singer Sargent was prolific in his career because he was a businessman at heart. Now, the Miss Vickers include a book. And ladies and gentlemen, we know that that is an attribute to imply the intelligence that these girls have been raised, know how to read. I'm not sure that Florence, who is in the white dress, is as interested in books. I think she might be a little dreamy. But Mabel is reading the book, and Clara clearly is looking at the audience as if to say, please come in and let me introduce you around, an independent woman in her own right. I think it is how Sargent gives character and interest to each person, and yes, aggrandized to an extent, but these are all charming ladies. Another grouping here, the Mrs. Hunter, is a painting that was particularly loved by Augustus Rodin, the great sculptor at the turn of the century. And I wonder if it's not the interlocking arms and the tight composition that you see here. Notice the arms that are entwined, and also notice the fan that is a real key compositional object, because that is what the heads of the ladies flowing out to the skirts is, a reverse of that same shape of a triangle. And of course, notice the dog who has made his mistress's skirt his bed right there, giving these skirts a sense of crunchy, wonderful satin that we can understand as being voluminous and very three-dimensional. I think that the pièce de résistance for Sargent, though, came when he was hired to paint the Wyndham sisters. And the Wyndham sisters from the left are Lady Echo, Mrs. Adine, and Mrs. Tennant. This was painted in 1899 to give you an idea of where we are. You can see that we are now not quite, maybe 15 to 20 years past the debacle of Madame X. And Sargent has been welcomed into homes and has been now asked to paint the leading patrician families of that era. I read in one of the reviews of this painting that it emphasized conspicuous leisure. And I thought that was such a appropriate statement, because these ladies are in gowns that have been made by designers. They're lounging around with seemingly nothing to disturb or distract them. They are in a lovely home. You can see Mother's portrait in the background and other portraits in the round frame. Fresh flowers inside, the glint of gilt on the frame, and the suggestion that these ladies all are intertwined together in their conspicuous leisure. Now, we've seen a lot of ladies, but I have to show you, I think, the epigee of Sargent's capturing the upper class. And it is here with Lord Ribblesdale. Isn't that a wonderful name? This was painted in 1902. And I love this image of English aristocracy. Right from the top hat to the long face of seriousness and great thoughts, right down past the brocade waistcoat, onto the leather trousers, the polished boots, and the crop in his hand. You know this is a coat of cashmere. And if there's any doubt about the position of this man in his own mind and in his society, look at him lined up with the pillar as though he too is the pillar holding everything together. At this stage, a portrait like this would cost in American dollars $85,000. It would have cost 500 guineas back then. But think of the status that Sargent is accruing. He was also asked to Scotland to paint this young lady. She is Lady Agnew of Lochnaw. She was an American, Gertrude, but she found a lord there that she was fond of, and he obviously was very fond of her. I think conspicuous leisure could apply to her also. And it was noted in a review of this painting that she was quite insistent that he worked fast on it, that she didn't want to spend all this time. Now, keep in mind that John Singer Sargent would be invited to the homes of his sitters, where he could get to see them in their own environment, pick locales that would complement them. He put a lot of thought and work into the portraits. And for a young woman to sort of clap her hands and say, let's get on with it, may not have appealed to him. And so he kind of left a reminder that watch out who you rush with, because if you look at this close up of her face, which is very lovely, and cover one side of it and then cover the other side, one side is smiling, makes her very pretty. The other side is smirking. And so clearly he has left for all history exactly how he felt about Lady Lucknow, Lady Agnew of Lucknow. Now, interestingly enough, he also was making trips to America, and he was asked to paint Mrs. Carol Meyer and her children. Mrs. Meyer and her children were Jewish, and they were quite wealthy and were not being received well into society. They had no entree in England, unfortunately. There was a good deal of anti-Semitism there. In America, they didn't have quite such an uphill climb, but by gaining the great portrait painter, John Singer Sargent, to do their portrait, it eased their way into exactly where they wanted to be in society. But the other American portraits are mostly different than what we see in England. This is a portrait of Mrs. Adrian Island. And ladies and gentlemen, you can see right here that this woman does not look like anybody to be trifled with. She looks directly at the viewer. She is shown with a beautiful piece of furniture, but that certainly is not the adornment or the accoutrements of a palace or anything other than maybe a beautiful home. And if there is any doubt about the character and the uprightness of this woman, I want you to look at the little finger on her left hand. I think this woman is tighter than a tick, and everything captured in this portrait seems to tell us about her character versus any silks and satins or wonderful molding or gilt frames in the background. She is ramrod straight. Here is one of his greatest patrons. This is Isabella Stuart Gardner herself. And this portrait she commissioned. Sargent had a room always available at her villa there in Boston. And she was not a particularly attractive woman, but she had a wonderful life, except for her lack of being able to bear children. And I find it very interesting that John Singer Sargent, who was very keen on this woman, places her in front of a Persian weaving that makes her look like not the sun, but Isabella Stuart Gardner radiating into the whole world. John Gardner was not fond of this portrait and didn't allow it to be shown in his house during his lifetime. He felt the pearls around the waist were too sexually charged for his wife. But his wife was the one who would walk, I think it was leopards, to the baseball game. While he was in America, he painted other portraits. This is one of my favorites. This is one of Mr. and Mrs. I.N. Phelps Stokes. And it is Mrs. Stokes in her tennis clothes, tennis outfit. Now, there's a funny story about that. Of course, we didn't see any of our British ladies in tennis clothes, but it was even going to be more casual because her right hand that is stretched out was supposed to have the lead on her favorite dog, a Great Dane. And the Great Dane was indisposed. I have no idea why. And so her husband offered to fill in. So here we have a young couple, I'm sure from very fine family, but Sargent capturing them in an entirely different way than he was doing with his British subjects. I think in looking at these, I wanted you to understand that the British portraits were definitely situated in tradition and, as I mentioned, the British psyche. The divisions of class were immaculate and could not be fooled with. In America, there were other ways to make social distinctions and to still maintain some popularity. While Sargent was in the States, he was also asked to do a variety of commissions. Again, here is an artist who is being paid something down, something in the middle, and something at the end. His income was flowing. And this is a mural from the Boston Public Library. He was also asked to do some murals there at the Widener Memorial Library on the campus of Harvard. He was fascinated with being a war correspondent and was asked to paint images of scenes that he had seen there. This was Gassed, which was exposing everybody to the disasters of this mustard gas being, I guess, blown onto our soldiers, causing blindness. But ladies and gentlemen, I have to emphasize that by this time, Sargent had painted over 800 portraits. He had commissions of some of the leading institutions, primarily in Boston, where Isabella Stuart was inviting him to stay and introducing him all throughout the town. He, for the first time in his life, was financially secure and could consider starting to paint for fun. And back to the continent he went, visiting artists and painting scenes from travels in Venice to trying watercolors where you could barely find the figure there in the painting, but at the same time seeing something that is looking surprisingly modern. He loved traveling. He loved Italy. He wanted to replicate all this in quick studies so that he could enjoy them like snapshots. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to finish up by saying he was criticized for painting subject matter like this when in fact, wasn't it the most modern of all paintings? He was often berated for only painting satins and chiffons and beautiful brocades. But why didn't the critics see that as the same kind of flourishes that the Impressionists were painting with dabs of light and color? And weren't some of his paintings also a testament to the changing mores that were going on between the European continent and America? But all in all, what I want you to take home from this, or to ponder as you sit in your home, with all his bravura, handling of paint, his details of luxurious accoutrements of homes, and the opalescence of the materials, the satins, the mercury of the water. Sargent always imbued his paintings with a powerful presence of the sitter, the projection of life lived at the turn of the century, and the crystallization of the moment. I don't think anyone can look at his paintings that doesn't desire to be a snippet of the very life that he recorded. He met his perfect location there in London and made himself a testament to all of art history. Ladies and gentlemen, John Singer Sargent. The move to London made him a move into legendary status. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Well, thank you for, yes, that presentation and the lovely images that accompanied your descriptions. We already have questions that have come in. We already have quite a few. I don't think it's perhaps surprising that the first two are about Madame X. So Bonnie Galloway asks, in Madame X, the hands do not look in proportion to the arms. The hands look a little chubby. Is there any significance to this?
I don't think there's really much significance to that. I think hands are extremely hard to paint. I also know that that is a very large painting. So it is never, if it's hanging in your house, so to speak, or hanging in a museum, you are looking up at it. So just like David, sculpted by Michelangelo, that has huge hands, it is taking perspective into account. Now, I've never read that. That is a supposition on my part, but that may be something that I could research. I have never been asked that before.
So I also want to, we have two people who have asked the same question on Madame X, and that is, didn't the original portrait of Madame X have one strap hanging down on her arm, and was it part of the scandal?
It definitely was part of the scandal. You can see the finished painting. He was told to put that right back up on her shoulder. And I think, you know, he lived with the Gautreaux in the south of France for quite a while. And of course, you can imagine looking at Madame Gautreaux that she might have really made advances at him and then was pulled back a little bit by her family, maybe her husband in particular, if not her parents. And so I don't think many people would have told a portrait artist to make changes. But this was early in his career, and I think he was very comfortable making an adjustment because he was what we would call wanting to use this painting to springboard to a very successful career. And at least for 1884, that was a compromise that was smart.
So I'm going to jump a bit out of the chronology of the questions because we do have one question asked twice. Who is the lady in this last painting that's on the last slide here?
This lady is his niece. And let me put my glasses back on. Let me see if I can get that information for you. Her name is Rose-Marie Ormond Michel. And of course, John Singer Sargent never married, never had any children. He had some very close friends, but his niece would have been very special to him. And I think, to be perfectly honest, he was very concerned about the direction of the upper class in Europe. And he had this transatlantic relationship with Americans as well as the British. And it was very clear in his paintings that he depicted American women in a much more aggressive way. And I think this painting of his niece suggests the ennui, maybe melancholy of being limited in your position, being stereotyped by your family, some of these issues that may have been coming to the fore. But I think there is a real melancholy here. And look at the tonalities. I love this. It's all these grays and half colors, and yet that satin skirt has so much scrunch and punch to it. And it's done using a rather large brush. It really kind of captures, at least to me, that age of moving. It was painted in 1911. So, you know, you're really on the verge of war here. So I think it was also a changing of the guard as we go forward into history.
Our next question comes from Charles Lumpkins, who asked, the two or more paintings before the Wyndham Sisters painting and the Wyndham Sisters painting itself have three persons, usually women, in focus, similar with the Myers painting. Was painting with three persons viewed as providing some sense of symmetry or balance?
You know, that is a very good question. And it was funny that they came right in a row like that. I don't think there was any edict that people were only allowed to have three daughters. I think, you know, that Sargent was a very close friend of the Impressionists, and you saw possibly even James McNeill Whistler. But all of these people were becoming fascinated with Asian aesthetics. And even here, the one we're looking at, Repose, is asymmetric. Now, 3 and 5 and 7 are wonderful numbers in ikebana flower arrangement and in a lot of balance. And I think you have hit upon something. I have never considered it before, but I do think that Sargent was a very cosmopolitan gentleman, and he would be aware of these changes in artistic dynamics and composition. And so many of his paintings, El Alio with the flamenco dancers, was asymmetric and almost a S curve of the body. All of these were aspects of Asian art that had not had such a central role until this part of the late 19th century. So I think the three might be responding to that also.
So our next question is from Patsy and Vol Sowery. Did Boldini and Singer Sargent know each other and see each other's work?
I can't answer that question. And the reason I'm sitting here saying that is, who's asking the question, Patsy and Val Sowery?
Correct.
Well, please, I think that's what sort of threw me off my game here. I know Val and Patsy Sowery, so I'm sorry I can't answer your question, but Happy New Year to you.
So our next question is from Adele Stern, who starts with absolutely spectacular presentation. Thank you. Do you think that if it had not been for London, Sargent would not have been recognized artistically in the United States? How was he received here?
Well, I think that's interesting. I think he would have always been successful. I think he was a businessman at heart. He was driven to get enough money that he could travel and be leisurely. I think that, frankly, he would have probably, I think he was a little bit of a chameleon. If he had stayed in Paris, he would have maybe gone with more theatricality. And that that was always the greatest insult to, if you were British, you would call somebody, oh, that's way too French a painting for me. So I think he would have done what it took. I think without a doubt, he was very canny in understanding British psychology. And he could tap into that with such a razor sharp eye, just like looking at Lady Agnew and leaving his mark there. He was quite a success on the continent. In America, I think most of his paintings were of institutions and connections in Boston. And so he would have had a successful career if he were only there, but nothing to compare with the success that he had in London.
So our next question, also from Charles Lumpkins. Any comments regarding the halo in the portrait of Isabella Stuart Gardner?
Well, that I mentioned, he positioned her in front of a Persian weaving. He loved Isabella Stuart Gardner. They were great friends. She gave him the third floor of her home so he could come there and paint to his heart's content. Always knew he had room and board there. And she was quite a free thinker herself. She came from a wealthy family. The Gardner, John Gardner, that she married was quite wealthy. And so I think that he knew, if you ever see other portraits of Isabella Stuart Gardner, she usually has like a veil across her face because she felt she was unattractive. Now, he wasn't going to do that, but I think he wanted to imply that literally she radiated her personality from inside out, and not to be dismayed if she wasn't presenting the prettiest face to the world. So I think it was meant as a great compliment. I don't think it was meant as anything else.
So our next question from Dave Grissett, fittingly of the New Orleans branch, when he asks, I believe Madame X was originally from New Orleans.
She was. And of course, New Orleans had Degas' family down there too. So you can imagine there were a lot of people living in the United States, just like John Singer Sargent's parents, who thought the only place to have any culture, although New Orleans had so much culture at that stage, was on the continent. Yes, Virginie Gautreau came from New Orleans and was a power in her own right, but she quickly decided to step off center stage after the brouhaha after that painting. So, but she was from New Orleans.
All right, and since we are running out of time, apologies to those who asked multiple questions. I think I got questions from pretty much everyone and asked at least one of them. So our last one is from Susan Lester, who asked, where is this picture of his niece on the sofa? It is exquisite, and I'd love to see it in person.
Well, I am sorry. I have not made a note of that, but it is Repose, Repose, 1911. Google it, and you might find all the rest of us there too.
All right. Well, thank you again, Jan, for your time in both the presentation, but also answering the flurry of questions. Again, I'm sorry to those questions that we didn't get around to. There were quite a number. So I will now like to ask the Executive Director of the English Speaking Union, Karen Karpovich, if she could say some last words. Karen?
Hi. Oh, sorry about that. Sorry about that. I just want to thank you so much, Jan. This was a lovely, lovely presentation and a very romantic way to spend a Wednesday afternoon looking at all these beautiful paintings. I've learned a lot. I've seen so many of these paintings and have always fallen in love with them, and to learn a little bit more about the people in them, because that's what they really kind of make you fascinated with, are the people. Thank you again, and we'd love to see you again talking about some other topic. We'd love to invite you back. Please feel free to come up with another exciting afternoon or romantic afternoon of information of this kind. I also want to thank our friends in the Central Florida branch, Barbara Hughes. It was an excellent suggestion. Thank you again. As I always mention at these presentations, the ESU is a member organization. If you're not a member, please become one. We would love to have you part of our community. And then again, enjoy another afternoon, a very different afternoon on February 2nd with Ulysses at 100. We'll talk about Ulysses and James Joyce. I think it'll be an interesting conversation, as I'm somebody who's had a hard time getting through Ulysses many, many times. I'm going to try to read it again before February 2nd, if I can. But please join us again on February 2nd. And thank you again, Jan. Thank you so much.